So you can't get credit for 2020 and then go oopsie in 2024.
Hi, we're here with a face that's probably familiar to you, but just in case it's not, will you go ahead and please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Stacey Abrams.
I've been involved in a lot of conversations recently about like whose votes matter. You know, living in New York, I think a lot of people come to me and they're like, my vote doesn't matter. Why would I do that? I think that's an insane sentiment personally, but what do you recommend people say to somebody who finds themselves involved in that conversation?
So I would begin by reminding people that it's not just about who wins at the top, and it's not even about the name on the ballot. It's about the person in the booth. And so the question is, what worries you? What concerns you? What hurts you? What issues are you facing? I promise you there's a politician responsible. And so voting matters because it's about figuring out which politician should be doing better by you and holding that person accountable. Your vote does matter. If it didn't matter, we wouldn't spend so much money trying to make you vote.
And it's so true that like if you go shake your fist outside of your local politician's office, they're probably going to pay attention to you.
I mean, look, I was one myself, so I describe it like 15-year-old girls. Politicians respond to money, peer pressure, and attention. There is no one better at bringing attention than Generation Z. Gen Z is exceptional at it, and it's like the superpower that they haven't quite discovered. It's like the beginning of one of the Spider-Man movies. They haven't quite realized what they can do, but if you all ever figured it out, the rest of us would be so grateful. We really would.
Yeah. And so much of that is wrapped in content. And I think one of the marvels that's going on for me is all over my feeds is people saying, vote early. Let's early vote. And we're here in Georgia. 1 million people have already voted early. That is unfathomable. But I think a lot of people see that call to vote early and they say, well, I'm going to do it, but I'm not totally sure why. Can you explain a little bit of the why?
So in 2020, we had the most accessible and successful elections in American history. More people voted than any time in our history, and more people had more options to vote. And that was because, we were in the pandemic. But what also happened was you had this relaxation of rules that were really put in place to make it harder for people to vote, harder for young people to vote, harder for homeless people to vote, harder for people of color to vote. In 2020, all of those rules got softened because we were in this pandemic. Early voting is one of the ways to guarantee you can show up, because it used to be you could only show up on a Tuesday in November. Most states don't give you, everyone has to give you the day off. They don't have to give you paid time off. And so early voting is really saying, make a plan to vote and please actually follow through with it. The other reality, though, and Georgia is one of these examples, because so many people voted by mail in 2020, because they actually had the ability to sit at home, read the ballot, look people up, and they voted on a lot of stuff. Well, certain politicians, namely Republicans, decided they didn't like that, so they made it harder. So we've had more than 100 rules changed between 2020 and 2020 and 2024. Those rule changes have made it harder to vote by mail. So one of the reasons you're seeing so many early votes in Georgia is that people who would have voted by mail in 2020 can't do it anymore because they've made it harder, especially for students. And so a lot of those folks have to now vote in person, but they've got things to do. So we say vote early because we can't wait for Tuesday, November 5th, but you can't do it the way you did it last time. So get in where you fit in.
I think part of my question with this, like I was going to bring this up anyway, is these elections are run by Republicans right now. And these two guys from 2020 kind of claim to fame, Brad Raffensperger and Gabriel Sterling. Brad Raffensperger, like on Main, called you a liar. And Gabriel Sterling subtweeted everybody who called these rule changes Jim Crow 2.0. From what I understand, they're taking the massive surge of early voters as a sign that their policies and their changes worked. How does that track for you?
That would be untrue. I don't like to call people liars, but I will say that they are patently and intentionally confused. So if you've got 2 lanes of traffic and someone throws down spike strips and puts in a roadblock, and therefore all of the drivers get into the other lane, that does not mean there weren't roadblocks. It just means they were determined to get to their destination, so they changed lanes. What they did in 2020 with SB 202, what they exacerbated with SB 189 this time is they've made it harder. In fact, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution did a study, and it is harder for Black people in Georgia to vote. They've made it harder to vote by mail. They've made it more difficult to vote on Sundays. They've made it more difficult to stand in line. All of those things come together, and we can't look at one rule and say, oh, that's okay. You have to look at how they all come together. And there was intentionality. Brad Raffensperger, Brian Kemp, and he works for them, Gabriel Sterling, are part of making it harder for people to vote. But the problem is people care more about their votes than they do about their villainy. And so they can be the villains of this piece and try to retcon it and pretend they didn't do something wrong. But we still know who threw those spike strips down. We still know who built those roadblocks. Republicans built those roadblocks, but voters are saying, we care so much about our democracy and so much about our future. We're going to circumvent your obstacles, and we're still going to make our voices heard because this is our country, this is our state, this is our democracy.
And people doing that is one half of the equation. I think what all of us are coming to understand, for better or for worse, I'm like, why do I need to know about all the certification processes? This is crazy. But they held the line more or less in 2020 when Donald Trump tried to push. Will they do that again?
Okay, so let's be clear about what happened in 2020. They refused to break the law, which I'm glad they didn't do. But so did every other governor and every other secretary of state. They all refused to break the law. Donald Trump just happened to call them and they happened to record the message. But I still, I credit them for not breaking the law. But what they've done now is change the law so it's easier to accomplish what he wanted. What he wanted was certification to stop. What they have done, SB 189, signed by Brian Kemp, makes it easier for the state election board to circumvent the rules and try to not certify elections. Voter suppression has three parts. Can you register and stay on the rolls? Can you cast a ballot? And does that ballot get counted? Well, what they are trying to do by changing these rules, and we can talk about them more in depth, is make it hard to count those votes. That was something that Brian Kemp signed into law and has refused to fix. So you can't get credit for 2020 and then go oopsie in 2024. Either you were right then or you were right now, but what's happening is that you are being silent and not using your power to fix the problem, and that sounds to me like complicity.
Is there anything they should be prepared for that we think will happen right now that you can shine a light on?
Yeah, so here's what they're trying to do. They're trying to sow chaos. I love comic books, and so like this is an attempt to create so much trouble and drama and maelstrom that we don't pay attention to the outcome. And so if you can break the system in lots of small ways, you don't have to run a bulldozer through. You remove a pin here and you break something there and the whole thing starts to fall apart. Well, the goal is for the 16 electoral college votes in Georgia, if they are not the way that these folks want them to be cast, that they don't have to count them. So they've done two things. One is they've said that counties can individually decide not to certify, that one person can decide, I don't like the outcome. Those are election deniers. And so they've made it a rule saying, yeah, you're fine. The second is we're going to make it take so long we miss the deadline. So if we just drag out the process, they can't, I don't have to turn my homework in because it took too long. And so that's the hand recount of every ballot. They want to drag out the process, and they're hoping that by dragging out the process, by making these crazy rules, by flouting the law, they can somehow stop Georgia's 16 electoral college votes from being cast in favor of Kamala Harris.
I think confidence in elections is something that we don't know how to grapple with in this country at all, especially I think people my age who are like, okay, we were told that it was going to be one way when we started voting, and it is very much not that way anymore. How do we build confidence back?
So I have this podcast called Assembly Required, and I did this fun episode with Ari Berman, who is one of the masterminds of how do we understand elections. Check it out. Mm-hmm. And one thing we talked about is that we have 50 different democracies. We like to think we're one big country, but every single state has a different set of rules. But you got to go all the way down the ballot because a lot of the problems start at the very bottom. They start in your school system. They start whether or not your college has the money it needs. Those are state decisions. Those are local decisions. And ultimately, it's do we want to have our own power or do we want to give it to someone who's told us they don't like us? Do we want to control our destinies, or do we want to hand it over to those who said, we don't care what happens to you, we just care about us?
I think a lot of this is showing up right now in a conversation about Black men as voters and them as a demographic. You spoke about them in 2022 when you ran, and I'm just kind of wondering, as the media especially latches on, like, are we giving undue attention to a group of high propensity voters who show up, and how do we deal with that?
So I love when people reject the notion of identity politics and then the next breath pick it up. So every single voter matters. There are, however, areas where people kind of come together around certain issues and certain needs. Women, we've got body parts that men don't seem to understand and want to regulate. Black men, in particular young Black men, experience very specific results by being a part of a society that does not always value their participation. And those issues deserve specific attention. It is not to the exclusion of anyone else, but it is by saying, I see you and I see you have challenges that I need to specifically address. What happens, though, is when a politician like myself or like Vice President Harris actually visibly and verbally articulates this, and they happen to share a skin tone, it is dismissed as either pandering or panic. It is respect. I respect voters. I went to campaign in places with people who look nothing like me, which is what Vice President Harris is doing. She is going where people are, and she's asking them what they need. And Black men deserve the same respect as farmers, as women, as folks in the Midwest. Every voting bloc that has a set of needs that should be addressed deserve to have a candidate say, I see you, and if you elect me, I will serve you.
I feel like that's I've never thought of it that way before. It's like a positive framing of like, you are actually getting the attention that you deserve in many cases. When Kamala Harris was talking to Charlemagne the other day, he was like, I want Liz Cheney to be yelling at white women. I'm like, do you think that idea has legs?
I don't think yelling at people changes their behavior. So I very much believe that when you stand for office, you are asking for permission to help. You don't get that by yelling at people. You don't get that by chastising them. People don't want a lecture. They want a living. They want access. They want better. And your job is to listen, not to lecture. And I think what Vice President Harris is doing is good governance, which is she is meeting people where they are and telling them that if you come with me, here's where we can go together.
We always say at the recount, we don't stand politicians. Like, that's just not something, because they work for you and you have to have a certain set of expectations. There has to be a certain set of accountability. And I'm focusing on the interplay a little bit of Kamala Harris being a woman. And a lot of men, I talked to a voter today and she was like, I don't think the men in my life are going to vote for a woman. And they're not saying that, but that's how I feel. I sometimes like lie awake at night and I'm like, I'm not sure that men that I even know who are liberal, like, can jump that hurdle. What do we do about that?
I think we need to give them more of the benefit of the doubt, because I think it's less that they won't do it and more they don't want to say it. Part of the challenge of sexism and machismo is that we build in an expectation, but we also have to build in grace. No pun intended.
Thank you.
We have to give people permission to be their best selves. And ultimately, when you're making a decision about who's going to be the president, the question is, do you want someone who has spent the last 4 months telling you how she wants to make your life better? Or do you want to spend the next 4 years with someone telling you how he plans to get revenge on everyone who's made him mad? Do you want the angry grandpa, or do you want the vibrant and intentional leader who wants to make your world better? I know who I'd pick, and I think men are smart enough to know what they should pick. But you've got a lot of societal pressure that tells you not to say it out loud. And I don't know if you know this, but there is still sexism in the world. But the question is, does that sexism outweigh your best interest? And I know people are like, oh, you're voting against your best interest. It's what you give primacy to. If you value this country, you should vote for someone who actually believes in the values of this country. If you value an economy that works for you, you should vote for someone who's not trying to raise your taxes because he doesn't understand what a tariff is. And if you value your patriotism, you should vote for someone who believes in the democracy we have, not the authoritarian dictator tin pot regime that he wants to create.
When it comes to masculinity, Donald Trump obviously sets one example. And you could look at Tim Walz or other Doug Emhoff as setting a very different example. I mentioned that my audience is 61% male. And I think they're very much, they tell me all the time, they're at a crossroads of like, am I going to remain firmly rooted in my anger and distrust, dissatisfaction, inability to communicate emotions, to connect with people, or am I going to take a leap and open up? And I feel like that's being seen in these options that we have in our political world. Do you think if Donald Trump wins, that is going to permanently alter how men and masculinity function in America?
I think it has to, because what he is creating is a dogmatic principle that says that the only thing that matters is me. And I come from a family, I have two brothers and a father who are good men, who have always lived up to the ideal of masculinity as one of protection and confidence and intentionality, but it's never been at my expense. It's never been at my mother's expense. It's never been at my sister's expense or their daughter's expense. True masculinity understands that you do what's best for us, not best for you. Donald Trump would turn that on its head, and more importantly, he intends to codify it. So let's be clear. His rhetoric now becomes policy if he wins. This isn't pie in the sky ideas. They've written it down. They've told us what they want to do, and we've actually seen it in action. I was in a conversation today about the fact that more than 100 women have faced near-death experiences across this country because they cannot get reproductive care. And the doctors don't know if they can help them. The lawyers tell them, well, I'm not sure you can have this help. Women have died in Georgia because the doctors couldn't figure out the law. If the doctors don't know what to do, how in the world is a woman supposed to know? And that comes back to men, because a woman brought you into the world. The highest form of masculinity is being willing to protect her life by knowing that you don't get everything you want so that she can get something she needs.
I'm like, we're going to put that on a billboard, please. I have one fun question that I like to ask, and some people don't think it's fun. I think it's fun. If you had to have dinner with one Republican, who would it be and why?
Right now? No. It's not hard. So I worked with Republicans when I was in the legislature, and I've gotten to have dinner with a lot of them and put some of them in my books. Mm-hmm. But probably Liz Cheney would be interesting. She and I don't agree on almost anything, but her willingness to value democracy over political points is, I think, a great example. And, I'd like to just find out what she does.
Go to Wyoming, see some cows and whatever. Yeah.
I love country music. I love cowboy novels. Hey,
why not? Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. That's all I got.